Well, good morning, everybody. Welcome to the webinar today for emergency management, where we're talking about real-time situational awareness. My name is Ryan Langcloss. I'm the Director of Public Safety Solutions. I'll be with you today, along with Jeff Marani, who's the Emergency Management Technical Lead, and Dan Basud, who's our Content Lead on the Living Atlas team. And we're excited to have you here today. I know this built off our previous webinar. We'll talk a little bit about that today as part of our agenda, just to reset and level together on where we started our conversation last time and what we're really digging into today around real-time situational awareness. We're going to take a look at some of the configurable apps that are part of our solution for emergency management operations to make sure you understand what's available to you as templates and tools to start to expose real-time content and data. And then Dan's going to bring us into the new world of what's coming up with Living Atlas, some live feed content that's out there, and how to utilize real-time data inside of ArcGIS. And then finally, we're going to take a look at how you put all that to action. So one of the big things we're going to talk about today is how do you get more proactive in the way that you take data into your systems and take action on it. So more than just passively watching a screen, we're going to talk about how you can put business rules in place and logic to really drive action for what you need to be paying attention to and when you should pay attention to it from a situational awareness perspective. And then we'll end today with a bit of a question and answer. We'll try to answer as many as we can, and then we'll give you a kind of a sneak peek at what's coming for the UC related to emergency management. So just to get started, a bit of housekeeping for everybody here. We're all muted today on the line, so there's a lot of you on the line today. So please just use your chat window to ask questions throughout the webinar. Feel free to chat those in. We will be monitoring that as we go throughout the morning, and we'll certainly be sharing that back out where relevant to the larger group. So don't hesitate to ask us questions as we go through. We'll try to answer as many as we can. If for some reason we don't get to your question through the chat window, we'll be sure to follow up with you after the webinar to deep dive on a question that may be a little bit more detailed than we can answer through a chat. We are recording this morning, so this recording will be shared back to you, all of the attendees that registered, but it'll also be posted online through the Esri website. So you can go to esri.com, public safety, and you can actually drive into our webinar from today, plus all the other historic webinars that we've done leading up to today as well. And then finally, just a bit of housekeeping on this front, you will get an email from us after the event. That email will have some links to follow for resources as well as other relevant content items related to situational awareness, some what's new with ArcGIS Online that just went live that we think are applicable to you as well. And then you can certainly give us feedback through that loop or ask to be followed up in more detail. So do take the time to review that at the end when we close out today, and then look for that email in the next few days with the link to the recording and resources. All right, so let's get started this morning. I wanted to kind of revisit our past webinars. We've moved this to quarterly, so it's been a few months since we talked to each other last time. And in that last webinar, we spent a long time talking about what's new in terms of emergency management operations and the solution that Esri has to help you prepare a baseline capability to support common workflows found in emergency management, especially the operations section of emergency management when you respond. And we covered 6 main topics here. We talked a lot about understanding potential impact from an incident, the requirement for that, how to estimate and deploy resources in relation to what you see coming in from that impact estimate. How do you monitor rapidly changing conditions? How do you put people in the field as teams to report damage directly from the field, capturing photo in the record and bringing that back in for damage assessment? And then how do you get to more of a real-time operational brief cadence? So how do you get away from static PowerPoints and truly move into a dynamic nature of presenting briefs that are pulling all of this content together in real time? And then communicating effectively and sharing information between partners and between organizations, but also with the public and media to help them understand the situation and to take action when it's appropriate. So if you weren't with us on the last time, I would encourage you to go back to the website, review that webinar. It's an hour in length. You'll have links and resources from that directly into a lot more than we're going to talk about today. But we're really going to hone in on one of the 3 patterns that we talked about, which is this maintaining situational awareness. Now, upcoming webinars, we've heard from you, we've taken your feedback, so we're going to be focused on damage assessment, and we'll focus in on public information. But today is a deep dive in talking about how do you maintain situational awareness, and really, what does that mean when we talk situational awareness? So why are we talking real time? I just want to kind of level set again here before we get into the content and material with Jeff and with Dan. But why real time? I think it's obvious for a lot of us, but just to talk about 3 of the key things that we hear all the time is the first is that idea that we talk about maintaining an understanding of how the event is unfolding around us, right? When we're in an operations center, right, we're sometimes disconnected from what's happening out in the field. And so the more that we can connect the field to the operations center, And the more that we can bring in real-time content from sensors and from partner providers like the Weather Service and others, the more context we have to understand how our plan is acting in relation to that unfolding event. And that event never stops, right? We know that the floodwaters continue to change, the sensors continue to alert, the cone of uncertainty for the hurricane changes as the forecast does. And so the more real time we can get in our ability to see that change and monitor those conditions, the better active we can be in terms of making our plan more effective. Now, the second thing we talk a lot about is tracking resources. That's personnel resources in the field. So how do I track my field crews that are doing a damage assessment or that are doing search and rescue activities? All the way to actually physical assets. So how do I know where resources are moving around in relation to the event that I'm seeing unfold in the operations center, so that we're, again, connecting the field to the office as much as we can. And then finally, all of that leads to the idea of why it's so important, which is really about being more proactive in what we do in emergency management, right? We certainly can't be resting on our laurels, so to speak, and just kind of waiting on the information coming in. The more anticipation we can have based on the real-time data and context that we're seeing, the better we can be proactive in terms of making decisions that can save lives and property when it matters most. So what's required to do that? Well, there's three main components. Number one is data, obviously, right? We have to have good real-time data coming in. That's data from your business systems, like your incident management systems, like WebEOC and others. It's data coming in from providers like the National Weather Service, the USGS, for example, to provide us context around the hazards that we're experiencing. But also just making sure that that data is real time. So it's not just static content like streets and parcels, which are really important for context, but we want this overlay of real time data that shows us how things are moving and interacting, so we start to have visual access to that information to make decisions. So we're going to talk about data a lot today. And the second thing that's really required then is something to put all that data into, and that's really the application interface. And those applications are really what we want to target the end user with. So what is the mission of the end user, whether that's a watch officer in an operations center, or it's a field team that's out there conducting damage assessment on a mobile device. We want to make sure the app is purpose specific to that mission, and that we're delivering the right data and content to that user in that application to help them do their job better, right? Not hinder the job that they have at hand. So we're going to take a look at applications that can get started with today to help you with these areas. And then finally, I think the most important part about making this a reality are your rules, right? Your business rules that tell you when you want to pay attention to something, or when you should pay attention, or when you should take action, right? It's more than just layering a bunch of data in real time on a map and seeing it on a bunch of points and lines and polygons start to show up in the context of my map. But there's a lot of noise and chaos when we start to get to that real time pulse. So how can we actually filter away that noise, right? Focus our attention on the relevant items, and that's where your business rules. So only show me alerts that are in relation to certain pieces of infrastructure, or only show me points for resources when they cross into an area that they're not supposed to be into, for example. So if we can take the data and the real-time context, put it into applications and apply business rules to that data through the applications, we become much better at anticipating when we should take action and making decisions the moment something happens, not being reactive to what it is in a much more passive way. So that's what we're going to talk about today, right? We're going to start with a look at the applications. I want to just deep dive and kind of, again, level set on the operations solution that we have. Let's talk specifically about situational awareness. Then we'll take a look at the data content that's available to help you get started today and how to start putting that into practice and some what's new. And then we'll end coming back and looking again at those applications and applying the business rules to those data feeds inside of the applications to alert you and know when to take action. So with that, I'd like to introduce Jeff Barani. Jeff's going to start us off by going back to our conversation last time, and we're going to actually pull apart situational awareness just as a refresh again, and then we'll transition over to Dan to dig into the data aspect. So with that, Jeff, the floor is yours.
Great. Thanks, Ryan, and good morning, everyone. First of all, we want to talk about, from an app perspective, monitoring operations in real time. So next slide. So we really see our users getting value of having an application in the command center that allows folks to get a quick glance of what's going on from a mapping perspective, both in blue and gray sky days. And the key thing here is not only is it from a mapping perspective, but kind of key performance indicators to go along with it. And one of the things that we'll talk about today is really how live feeds can kind of contribute to that. There are counts and lists widgets that we want to add to that to indicate, activity that may be going on in our area and our jurisdiction that may cause us to activate or otherwise need to to act on information that's coming in from a live feeds perspective. So, really what we wanted one kind of key thing here is that the incident status dashboard is really important and is helpful to kind of have running unattended in your command center to have folks get a better understanding of what's going on. So this is a configuration of the ops dashboard, and we'll be going into more detail on this later in the webinar to show you how to configure this with additional live feeds that Dan will talk about here in just a few minutes. So next slide. Additionally, the situation awareness viewer is really helpful to quickly get a sense of who and what could potentially be impacted, from an event. So this is a configuration of the web app builder with a couple of key widgets like info summary and situation awareness, and those can be configured against the live feeds to show, what may be going on in a jurisdiction, and then drilling down and get further details and intelligence on the potential impact. And this can be against any kind of, quote unquote, asset information that you're interested in, schools, nursing homes, hospitals, and the like, or even if it can be any sort of asset that you've got within inside your organization. And from the weather information is one way to better kind of understand the impact there. Certainly demographics can be combined as a part of that. So being understand quickly from an analytic perspective and not necessarily having to go through the GIS staff to get access to this information has proved to have been quite valuable for folks. And finally, next slide. From a briefing perspective, that's another kind of key aspect from a situation awareness perspective. Conducting briefings, both in blue and gray sky days about, kind of current conditions, what's the kind of status of the incident and the like. From a template perspective, the incident briefing is really kind of set up to tell the story, of an event as it's, unfolding. Later this year, the solutions team will release an additional app that's kind of set up for more from a blue sky perspective and monitoring current conditions, having tabs and elements within inside the story map that really can kind of tell the story along the lines of different, disaster types and feeds, and live feeds are a great way to add dynamic content to this, so to allow you to brief your teams in real time and not have to update PowerPoint, screenshots and the like is keeping that information up to date. So again, this is a configuration of story maps and one of the templates that comes with the operations offering. So before we dive into the meat of the presentation today with the live feeds, we really just wanted to reset and refresh on some of the key apps that can leverage this great content that we have available. So back to you, Ryan.
All right, thanks, Jeff. So hopefully that gives you a good sense. For, again, I would encourage you to go back, spend some time on the last webinar to really get more details about what those apps are. You're going to see those later today as we kind of walk through the configuration, and Jeff will pick back up on those again in the context of setting the business rules around it, configuring some of the applications. But those 3 series of templates are available to download. You can find them today on our website. So certainly spend some time, again, if you've not explored those as a starting point. It's a great place to get up and running. All right, so we're about to talk about data. We're going to shift over and spend kind of the majority of our time this morning really talking about real-time content and data from the Living Atlas. But before we do, we want to have a poll question here. Just to get a sense for Dan as we get started, we want to ask you just a simple yes and no question. So if you could just interact with what you see on the screen and select yes or no. And certainly the question is, are you currently utilizing real-time weather and disaster layers from the ArcGIS Living Atlas of the world today inside of your application? So you can say yes or no. If you're not sure which one to choose, just go ahead and select no, obviously, on the list there. But this will help us understand there's some changes that have been made to some of the live content and feeds that we're going to focus on, but we'll spend a bit more time depending on where the audience kind of falls in this yes, no. So just take a moment. I'll give everybody a second if you haven't had a chance to react to it. Are you currently utilizing real-time weather and disaster layers from the ArcGIS Living Atlas of the world? So just go ahead and select one of those, please. All right, let's take a look at the results and see where we're at. All right, so about 68% no, so that's good, Dan, as we kind of know where we're focused our time, but 32% of you that are, there are some exciting changes coming. So those of you that are no, I think you're gonna find some interesting topics today, a wealth of information, but also just some exciting things that you can start immediately putting into practice for your operations on that front. So with that, we can close the poll down and we'll get started. So Dan, welcome to the stage. I want to introduce Dan again. He's on the Living Atlas of the World team. He works a lot in content development, has been a tremendous help for us in public safety and releasing information from the weather. A very interesting background. So if you look him up on LinkedIn and connect with Dan, I think you'll appreciate his background in weather data and the like. So Dan, I'll turn it over to you. The floor is all yours. Thanks.
All right. Thank you very much, Ryan. So I am great. So again, my name's Dan Pursuit, and I work with the Living Atlas team in the ArcGIS environment. So for those of you, and it seems like about 2/3 of you are not using some of the weather and disaster related content in Living Atlas. So I think I'll spend a little bit more time giving a more general overview on that. So Living Atlas is really one of the main content areas or ways that you get content in the ArcGIS platform. We've divided the Living Atlas of the World into some different areas: imagery, the base maps that you're familiar with, demographic data, boundaries, infrastructure data. All of this has either been contributed by our community of users or it has been developed by our teams here at Esri. And what I'm going to focus on today is within this environment portfolio, which I manage, one specific area that is what we call Earth observations. And these are the data sets that are updating in real time or in near real time. And they're either, again, developed by our Living Atlas teams here at Esri, or they're contributed by organizations like NOAA and emergency management agencies across the world. And before I get into the data, and since this is going to be a data-heavy webinar, I kind of just wanted to reemphasize the fact that we're going to be talking a lot about data and layers here that are, environmental in nature, weather, disaster, earth obs in nature. But there's really this marriage that's amazing in the ArcGIS platform, in which you're able to find that intersect with your assets, with your populations, and figure out what that risk assessment really is. And that's something, Ryan mentioned that my past, and I came from NOAA and the Weather Service, and that was something that we've always struggled with is in a typically non-GIS arena, how do you predict the weather and then understand the impact? So you can communicate that risk even better to your constituents. And what's really exciting is within Living Atlas, we're allowing people to do that with data from the Living Atlas, but then also data that is of your own. So you might be combining some of our environmental data or some of our population data with your assets or your population data or your environmental data, and to create a greater knowledge. And I think that's what's really exciting about this. So to start, Living Atlas is integrated across the ArcGIS platform, but I think the easiest way to really get a sense of what's in Living Atlas is to go to the website livingatlas.arcgis.com. And there in the browse section, you'll be able to filter down into all the different topic areas and who's contributing the content. Are they layers? Are they maps? Are they web maps? Are they apps? And Living Atlas has a collection of all these different things. It could be individual image services and feature services. They could be web maps that people have built and configured. They could also be story maps and web apps and dashboards. Also in the Living Atlas website, we have a lot of other rich content, blogs and how-tos and things like that. And I should also mention the ability to contribute your data, whether that is something like you have a network of stream gauges that you want to incorporate into our unified stream gauge map, or you want to update your individual neighborhoods into our base maps so that your streets and names and the location of buildings are reflected in the Esri base maps. You can do that through Living Atlas Community Maps program. So that's also some really powerful integration there. But so once you're in the Living Atlas, you can find a website, you can start to find the content, which is then accessible through all of the other platforms, whether you're in ArcGIS Online or ArcGIS Pro, even some of the, the other apps, story maps and and collector, things like that, that you can start to access these layers. So what I thought I would do is do a little deep dive into a lot of the weather and disaster layers that we have in Living Atlas. And for these today, I'm going to focus on the layers that the Esri team has developed. And the reason I'm doing that is we can put a little bit greater stamp of approval on these. We know that these scale in the cloud. These are always going to be available for you. They're not going to go down. You know, the Living Atlas is a curate collection with authoritative data from all over. But just like any server-based technology, some things are more performant than others. The ones that I'm going to show you today are you know, are pretty rock solid. And so again, these are all authoritative data sources that we are pulling into our environment, and we're running these services. So to start with are some of the bread and butter forecast and weather products that come from NOAA and the National Weather Service. And those are our weather watches and warnings, so the polygons that show you the different types of events that are predicted over a given forecast area or region. The short-term warnings, so these are things like gale force winds and tornadoes and hail, the short-term events that are more severe in nature, are a subset of the USA weather watches and warnings. The storm reports that come in after the fact of here we had a hail report, here was a tornado report, and we have those individual points. And you can see on the right hand how often these services update into the maps that we provide. We have current weather stations from around the world, and this is really useful. So this provides the what is now around the world from all the METAR airport weather stations. And there's 11 different variables that are associated with each one of these. So there's a lot that you can do, and then use that in an analysis, and you could interpolate those points. You could do summaries around those points and buffers within the platform, which is really great. We have the USA forecast model. So these are what NOAA calls the NDFD, the National Digital Forecast Database. So these run for the contiguous United States. The model runs every 6 hours and updates for 72-hour forecast. And then we have our updates within our system in which we're pinging, looking for any potential changes. The NDFD are really great because they pull the numerical model from NOAA, but then the individual forecast office goes through and tweaks that with their own site-specific knowledge. So you're getting the best information from both the advanced computer modeling that NOAA provides, and then the years of experience of local weather forecast offices that know the little idiosyncrasies of weather in an area. And again, we have the same for smoke forecast across the United States. The last thing on this one is the National Water Model. If you're not familiar with that, that's pictured below. This was released by NOAA 3 or 4 years ago, and this provides us river and stream flow forecasts for the entire United States. So this is done at an NDF high resolution stream and river polygon for basically stream flow and the anomaly. So you're able to see how much above normal will this stream or river be in its flow for the next 18 hours, the next 10 days out, with incremental steps in between. Disaster feeds. I kind of separate these a little bit from weather. Of course, we have our hurricane forecast, so we're pulling in global hurricane forecasts and cyclone forecasts from NOAA, the National Hurricane Center, and the Joint Typhoon Warning Center, which handles the Pacific and Indian basins. We also have recent hurricanes, so these are the more historic things. These aren't what's active now, these are what's happened over the past year, the past calendar year. And so we pull that again from NOAA's National Hurricane Center and the IV tracks, which is the World Meteorological Association's best database of hurricane tracks. We have recent earthquakes from USGS, and this is global again. We have the USA wildfire activity. We've typically been pulling this from GeoMac and Irwin. Some of you might be familiar that there's a new product coming on right now from the National Incident Feature Service, it's called. And we are going to be incorporating that into our feeds over the next couple of weeks. So we hope to have that improved version out and and usable by the community. Then we have some other things like flood mapping, in which we take some of our stream gauge networks, and we'll just do some queries on it to understand if things are flooding, and so we start to filter out some of the noise and show the signal there. Observations, these come from networks around the world, whether they're satellites or in situ measurements. We have our satellite hotspot and fire thermal detection from NASA, so using NASA's MODIS-based satellites. We have millions of detections around the world every day of hotspots, which are potential wildfires. The stream gauge network, we compile through our community maps program contributions of stream networks all over the world. So of course we have a lot in the United States from USGS and NOAA, but then we get contributions from countries here and there, and academic organizations that have networks. Again, if you have knowledge of other stream gauge networks, we'd love to have that information, because we have to build that into some of the other products like the National Water Model and a global water model that's being developed right now. HICOM is a numerical forecast for the ocean. So from that, you get sea surface temperature, sea surface height. So we'll know wave conditions. And we know that not just at the surface, but in depth through the entire ocean. So if you're starting to look at interactions between the atmosphere and ocean, this is a really great thing to look at. And we have that for satellite-based SST as well. And then we get into some more climate-related observations, U.S. drought conditions. So this is updating from NOAA every week, and hydrology analysis. So we have information on soil moisture, precipitation, snowpack, all these things that you might need to know. And this is a reanalysis. So we're showing what was in real time the last month and all the months and years prior to. So it's not a forecast, it's a reanalysis. Multispectral imagery is always useful when we're talking about understanding impacts as they might be coming in, and then also doing impact assessment. So we have GOES weather imagery. We've had that in Living Atlas for a while, and I have some news on that, which you'll see in a couple minutes. We have multispectral imagery from MODIS sensors on NASA satellites. And so we might be looking at different land conditions and band combinations from the MODIS sensors, which provide 250 meter, 750 meter, 1 kilometer resolution, depending on the individual product. Recently launched a couple of years ago and then added into Living Atlas last year was Sentinel-2. This is a relatively high resolution Earth observing satellite constellation that is developed by the European Space Agency. This is very similar to Landsat, if you're familiar with it. It's just that there's multiple satellites, so we get a higher revisit time than we do with Landsat. But it's pretty similar. We get about 30 meter, 15 meter resolution, depending on the band that you want to do. But it's really great for understanding areas of flood inundation, if we happen to get a revisit soon after, and looking at a lot of different land condition products. That was a lot of information. And luckily for you, all of this has been summarized in a blog that we have. It's been out on the ArcGIS blog site for almost a year now, putting the live in Living Atlas of the World. Jeff has been mentioning the live feeds, and the live feeds is a term that we use to describe these automated update data services that we have in Living Atlas. And so all the things that I've listed, basically those same matrices that I've shown, are in this blog along with links to the actual services, so you don't have to worry about getting things from the PowerPoint here. You can go online right now and see this blog. I also have some other resources that would be useful. They may not be from Esri, they might be from some of our other contributors that are really useful for weather and disaster situational awareness. So some other things that we've been developing recently, we've been working with developing some dashboards that are kind of general in use and use a very similar format. So if you wanted to bring these into your operations center, you could do that. You could build each one of these into a different tab on a story map or another web app builder and start to combine elements. I'm going to configure these so that they can actually be saved as, and you can modify these dashboards. That's a little unknown feature in dashboard capability. So if you want to modify some of the attributes or add a window pane into them, you'll be able to do that. One thing that we have recently is USA severe weather reports. See, there's 20 different types, over 20 different types of local severe weather reports that come into the National Weather Service. And this is a great example of a contribution to Living Atlas. Georgia Emergency Management Agency just recently contributed that hosted feature service. So again, that's going to scale really nicely and be reliable throughout time. And we have similar types of dashboards for stream gauges and fires, and we'll be doing some other ones over the next couple months. So take a look. You can dashboards are in the Living Atlas browse categories that you can find online. So take a look to see what's in there. That's a recent addition, so there's not too many right now, but we're always looking for interesting contributions as well. So some really exciting news. As of today, this morning, just an hour ago, we officially announced that we have a new set of live feed services. Traditionally, our live feed services were using map services, which are a little bit older technology. And we have been upgrading those to hosted feature services. That sounds like, just jargon, but it's really exciting for the capabilities that we'll get to, but and I'll talk about that in a minute. But basically, some of the elements that we talked about before, some of the services we talked about before, are going to be in this new version. So these are listed out here. They're also on that blog that I referred to earlier, and they're called out specifically on the blog, the ones that have updates. So we've done all those bread and butter weather and some of the disaster products, and then, as I mentioned, we'll have the new version of the USA wildfire activity, the wildfire perimeters and points, along with an upgrade to the recent earthquakes layer. And so those are all either out now or will be coming out in the next month or so. So if you have been, and it looked like about 35% of the participants are using some of these live feeds, now is the time, or when you get a chance, to migrate to those new versions. And why would you want to migrate? It takes a couple minutes. But I think what you're going to see is a lot of benefit. So one great thing is those live feeds, they required a subscription to access. You needed to have an ArcGIS Online subscription. And if you wanted to build an app, you had to embed credentials. If somebody outside without an ArcGIS Online account wanted to view that app or wanted to view that map, that's no longer the case right now or anymore. These new services are free and open. You can use them however you want. You can use them in whatever platform you want. They are free and open data. The older versions will still require those logins. So that's a even greater reason to switch over. You'll get more usability out of it. Feature services, the hosted feature services, they're going to auto scale. We use Microsoft Azure for these services. So as quickly as Microsoft Azure can scale up the number of servers based on demand, that performance is just going to keep increasing and meet that demand, which is going to be great. We've seen a lot of demand over the recent years for major landfall and hurricanes, where non-cloud services really slowed down, and you're not going to see any lag anymore. Hosted feature services, they don't cache in your display like some of the old map services do. So let's say there's an update to one of those layers, it's automatically going to update in your web browser, your web map, the app that you're using. If you set a live and refresh on it, it's automatically going to update in the display, and you don't have to pan or zoom around to kind of override that cache anymore. So that's really great. Just let those things sit there and they'll automatically update. Feature services, hosted feature services can use what we call feature sets. And this is relatively new in ArcGIS platform, ArcGIS Online. And that's the ability to take information from one layer in a web map and bring it into another layer. And you could use that to create new symbology. So if I wanted to take one element from a forecast or a weather watch and warning with maybe some of the data that you have, and you have that as a hosted feature service in the same web map, you can interrogate those individual layers and come up with unique pop-ups and symbology from those feature sets. It's a really great thing. There's a lot of blogs out on feature sets right now on the ArcGIS blog, so I encourage you to take a look at feature sets. Hosted feature services have greater integration into the ArcGIS online or the ArcGIS platform, especially in things like dashboards. You get greater ability to kind of zoom and query and filter all those kind of interactive functions that we want out of dashboards when you're using hosted feature services. And probably the number one reason to do the migration is we will eventually deprecate those old map services. They'll be around for the remainder of this year and a little bit after, depending on what the topic is, and if we get into some kind of major forest fire event, we're not going to deprecate the old one as things are intense around the country. But we really strongly encourage you to do the migration, because eventually everything will be deprecated. So what's next from Living Atlas? We have a couple of really great things. One, we are building improved maps for all these different services. We have some new cartographers on the team, and they're really helping us to update that kind of older symbology. We're not updating the symbology in the other maps that you might be using from Living Atlas. So if you're using the current active hurricanes map, we're not going to update that one. We're going to provide a new one. So you don't have to worry about your legends, maybe in your story maps or your other apps changing. We'll just add new things to Living Atlas. We're taking advantage of Arcade to come up with more interesting ways to symbolize multiple attributes into a single symbol, or come up with new ways to provide more meaningful pop-up information. So again, we can use those feature sets to combine information from one layer into another layer and provide you with all the information in a single pop-up, so you don't have to scroll through multiple pop-ups. Something that's really exciting is it was a busy morning. Besides going live with the live feeds, we have now from NOAA in Living Atlas 2 versions of their geostationary satellite imagery, a colorized IR, which is the one on the left, and a grayscale IR. This comes from GOES 16 and 17, which are the newest NOAA satellites. They update the entire hemisphere every 10 minutes. And when we blend that in with the Japanese equivalent of GOES, we are getting basically everything from Africa through India, the entire Atlantic and Pacific, and some of the Indian basin, updating every 10 minutes in a tiled image service here. So right now there's the 2 IR. Pretty soon, hopefully in the next couple of days, we'll have the version on the right, which is what we call geocolor. So that shows the true color, synthetic true color during the day, and kind of an IR cloud information at night. So that's been really popular, and these are, again, are great contributions from NOAA. Thank you very much. One last thing that I'll go into is a new app we are going to release by next week. We'll have this available by UC, by Esri user conference, and that is what we're calling Hurricane Aware. And I am going to demo that for you right now, if I can find. So Hurricane Aware is kind of getting back to that first or second slide, where we want to integrate environmental information with population information. And so I have some demo data here. This is a little back to the future, as I was saying to the other participants earlier today. We're showing Hurricane Irma just in a demo mode here. And what you'll be able to do is either type in a location that you want or select an active hurricane. If we went to the non-demo version, we would see the active storms out there right now. So if I select Irma, the map will automatically zoom to it, and we can click on the different time outputs from the hurricane forecast and see where the storm's going to be, get the basic information of where it's at. But what's really powerful about this app is we can start to click on areas in the United States and get information specific to that area. So we can see that Okeechobee, Florida doesn't have any forecast precipitation for the next couple days, but you can start to see the wind gusts that are expected. If you've ever lived through hurricanes, and I've lived through a bunch when I lived on the East Coast from North Carolina to Florida. Knowing when those wind gusts are really going to start to hit is important for when you start to put those boards on your windows. You want to be out there when winds are starting to gust at 40 miles an hour with aluminum sheeting or plywood. So we're really starting to think about how that storm will affect those areas. You can also put is separate from the hurricane forecast. So we're saying the national forecast here. And you can start to click around and start to see what some of the cascading weather impacts could be for any area in the United States. And again, we only have this weather information for the United States. So if you start to click on areas in Cuba, you're not going to see anything. But what's really even more interesting is we've built in demographic information into these maps. So if we want to scroll through here, we could click on an area like Hialeah, and we can start to see that most of the population speaks another language other than English. That we have the different percentages in different age brackets. What percentage has a cell phone, which doesn't, which has access to the internet. And this all will impact how we distribute information, whether it's a alert or it's an evacuation. We wanted to build something that would provide that kind of situational awareness to both emergency responders and planners, but then also the general public, so they can kind of get an understanding of exactly what's going to happen, exactly where they live. So with that, I'm going to kick it back over to Ryan, and I think he has a couple more things to share with you on apps.
Awesome. Thanks, Dan. I appreciate that. So I'm just ecstatic, right? I mean, I think you guys that are attending are probably taking notes. I hope you're just as excited as I am at what Dan just showed. I mean, the fact that, number one, there's this wealth of information that exists that's updating in real time from authoritative providers is amazing. The fact that now those feature services auto scale, they update in real time inside of my maps and apps, it's just phenomenal, right? Those are things that we have been struggling with collectively, I think, as a community for a number of years. So we're finally at a tipping point to see that that's a reality, right? So that's just super exciting to me. And then the fact we have now every 10 minutes geostationary satellite imagery coming in across these basins is just phenomenal. Right? So these are three major things that he just showed. I think were just blowing my mind. And then finally, the new applications that he's demonstrating, certainly give us feedback on that through chat, or you can reach out. We'll share some email information towards the end, but let us know, right? So as Dan kind of indicated, we are interested in helping kind of pre-populate some of these applications that help you make better decisions, that take some of that decision making and just put it at your fingertip, right? Click a point on the map, get the relevant information. So your feedback, your requirements as a public safety community and as emergency managers is really important to us, right? So don't skip over that. So Dan, thanks for taking the time. Dan will be with us this weekend at the National Security Summit and at the UC next week. We'll talk about that before we leave today, but certainly, keep asking us questions, go learn how to integrate those services into your maps today. Don't delay, as he said, kind of looking at the migration path. All right, so let's take a look now at using that content. So Dan set us up with all the content. We understand kind of the apps. Let's talk about how we can actually now drive action. So using things like GeoVentSurfer and others, like how do we actually take data in? How do we put business rules and logic around that to drive the applications in real time for us? So with that, I'd like to bring Jeff back in to talk to us. And Jeff, the floor is all yours again. Thanks.
Great. Well, thanks, everyone. Well, so first of all, I want to show you how to get started with accessing these live feeds and adding these to your web maps and apps today. So first of all, I'm starting off here with inside my map in ArcGIS Online. I simply can go to Add, Browse, Living Atlas. And as Dan mentioned, there's many different categories that are set up with inside the Living Atlas environment, but really where these live feeds live is within inside the Earth observation category. So that's one way to browse in here, and I like to just come in here and look for the various live feeds that are registered here. So I'll just go ahead inside this web map and just add in a couple of these to get started with today. So with just a couple of quick clicks here, now I've loaded up my map with a bunch of live feeds of information for things that are important to us. So we've added in the weather warnings and watches. We can also see Hurricane Barbara in the forecast track right here, the cone of uncertainty as it approaches towards, Hawaii. Hopefully, it makes a turn. And now I've, with just a couple of clicks, I've added in the key things that are important to me. Let me add in one other layer here. We'll add in storm reports. And so, certainly over time and different seasons, there may be different types of information that are important to add here. Some of the forecast data for, snow and ice and the like are other, options for this. So previously, as Dan mentioned, the services were coming from ArcGIS Server, and those were coming from map services. So you'll notice now that we're actually seeing a lot of different layers here. This is a part of the data coming in from feature services now, so that's not grouped or nested. These are certainly just coming in now as a part of a single set of layers here. So I'm going to clean up my display here just a little bit to focus on a couple of key things. The weather warnings and watches is the main thing that I want to focus on here from a configuration perspective. So now we've got this added in to our map, and we can see some of these real-time feeds coming in from the various providers. Obviously, from a web map perspective, it's important now to save this. So now that I've got a couple of these feeds added into my map, I'm going to save this and create a quick title for this, so then I can use it later on to derive other configuration of other apps. A couple of key things here to notice is there's already some options that are set for us here as a part of this. The refresh interval is already set by default. We've already got some symbology that's set, as well as pop-ups that are set for some of these. So we've already done some work for you to get started as a part of this process. So really quickly, now that I've got this as a part of a web map, I can go ahead and share this and do some quick configuration from an app perspective. So for the purposes of the webinar here today, we'll focus on the operations dashboard. So we'll create a quick dashboard and show you how you can configure these feeds inside the dashboard. So in this case, it's taking me out to a different configuration environment where I can start to do some editing and configuring of these live feeds inside the various widgets in the application. Let me pull out, all right, so there we go. Once the internet's caught up here now. So one of the key things to start with here is adding in some various, widgets. So one of my favorite, widgets here is simply a list widget. So what are the things that may be, important to us that we want to simply, list out on the map? So in this case, what are the severe weather warnings that may be, taking place? So now I've got these, listed out. I'm going to, include, maybe both kind of the type as well as, the area that's affected here as a part of that. So now in this list here, within my map, I can show what are the key severe weather elements, severe alerts that may be going on throughout our jurisdiction. Maybe we want to add in a count to this as well. So we can add in, really quickly a count indicator widget based on these severe events and have that show up as a count here. We'll dock that underneath. And then there was another question, during the course of the webinar to ask about how we can filter these. So one of the tricks that you can do is then filter these to only show, let's see, when the map extent, changes. So here, now as we zoom into different areas, we can see we can filter out here elements, on the map as we zoom into different areas. So this is a way that, based on the extent of your map that you have set up, to only show the weather warnings and watches that are important to you as a part of your jurisdiction. So that's one aspect of how you can certainly configure this to make this more important and tactical for you. So I realize we're kind of coming close to the end of our kind of time here, but a couple other things really quick. Also, with inside here, we can add various, actions. So if we want to, show the pop-up that's already been predefined, if we want to zoom into the area that's being affected and maybe, flash that information, we can add some more kind of interactions here to provide some more kind of details as a part of this. So, again, here with just in a couple of clicks, I've been able to configure this and put these live feeds to work for me to configure this with inside applications that are important to us. So that's the basics of adding live feeds to web maps and apps. We can bring those, certainly go to the live feeds category, search for the various feeds that are important to us, add those into our web maps, change any knobs and dials that are important, and then as we bring those into our applications here, like the operations dashboard, we could take advantage of these from an interaction perspective and configure these with inside the widgets and the gauges and the like with inside the operations dashboard. One quick comment in closing is there's been some questions about can these live feeds be integrated with geo events, and the answer is yes. So in this case, we've got a really simple example where we're, monitoring, Esri offices that may be impacted by potential weather. This is, it really can be any, asset that you're, interested in, but for the purposes of demonstration here, we're just simply focusing on Esri offices. So I realize this is a very, busy map, but what it's telling us is there's one Esri office that's currently in a flood warning area, and there's business logic that's being applied through geo events behind the scenes to help really kind of tell us that information. So, to really kind of deconstruct that, what that really means is we've got, assets, things that we care about, and what we look for is where those intersect with, various, live feeds or weather warnings and watches like this. And in the end, we've got simply one, office in this case, or one asset, if you will, that has been potentially impacted. And geo events is doing the work behind the scenes then to now kind of tell us, this information and kind of bring this out and highlight this for us. So I realize we didn't get into that in too much detail today on the webinar. We can certainly cover that in future webinars, but just one last point to add in here on to add further intelligence and really kind of business rules through geo events to further leverage the value of live feeds. So with that, we'll turn it back over to Ryan to close us out for this morning's session.
All right, thanks, Jeff. So what I love Jeff's demonstration, right? You've got all this Living Atlas content. So those that are already using ArcGIS, it's easy as searching for the layer type or going into the Living Atlas, navigating to the right folder, adding it to the map, and then just configuring the map, right? So changing some of the logic you see to make the map look the way you want to configure pop-ups if you'd like to change some of that. But a lot of that work is, as you saw, has been done, right? Kind of Dan's point, the refresh intervals have been set, right? Cartography has been set. So we're trying to make it as readily consumable as possible for you as end users. So hopefully that came through in his demonstration. And then for those that have never configured a dashboard before, I hope you get a sense too of how easy it is. It literally is, you start with the map, you put the right layers together, you save the map, and then you just launch the dashboard and start adding elements to the dashboard, right? Widgets to the dashboard that read that data. So it really is that simple of configuring. I would say that, again, I would encourage you, if you've never watched this before, if this might be the first one that you're visiting, I would say go back and watch last month's event as well. Certainly look at our webinar that's been recorded. We cover quite a bit about what's included, a little more of the templates that are there that are ready packaged for you to use. So for example, there are pre-configured dashboards, part of that solution that we offer that is ready to run, that has some of this Living Atlas content built into it as part of the deployment. So if you want to do it yourself, there's a way you can do it. If you'd like Esri to help you do it, there's ways out of the box that we have a starting point that, again, creates that baseline of capability that you can start to build on top of. So we have multiple ways we can help you, and hope for those of you that want to take it on yourself, there's a way to do that. And if you need a little more easy button, there's a way we can do that as well. So thanks, Jeff, for taking the time to show us a bit of that configuration. We do have a bit of time for question and answer. We got about 5 minutes left, and there were a couple of key points I just want to kind of raise back with Dan and Jeff on the phone here that I think are applicable to a lot of us. The first one that came back is we've had a lot of questions about global data in terms of the Living Atlas. Weather data we looked at, environmental data, and you got a sense of some of that global content. But Dan, could you maybe speak to how we look at global data from a weather perspective and just what's available and how we work in that realm?
Yeah, global data is so important when you're talking about weather because it's really, you have to understand where the weather is and where it's coming from to really understand what could impact you. Unfortunately, a lot of the numerical weather models that we have in Living Atlas are only for the contiguous United States. And that's because, some of the size of the data from these services that were built, 7 years ago. We need to do some assessment about how we can bring in some global weather models and forecasts. Having said that, we are working and always continue to work with our partners, whether they are NOAA. We work very closely with them every day on getting new and better and more reliable global forecast data stood up by them, or it could be some of our commercial partners who are utilizing the ArcGIS platform and getting them to either put their weather data and forecast data into Living Atlas or in Marketplace. And so we're trying to really develop a strategy to get some more comprehensive weather data available to our users.
Yeah, thanks, Dan. So I think, takeaway is certainly keep working. I would say for those that are on the phone, if you have questions about, your specific country, where you're at in the world, certainly follow up after this, send us a note. I'll, again, put some contact information after that, but let us know. And I think alternatively, as Dan mentioned as part of his comments too, this kind of curated content that is contributed to by users like yourself. So if you are part of an organization, we'd love to hear from you as well, right? I think that's the other thing we'd like to pick up from today. One other question that came through, and I thought was a good one here, is, for those of you that are currently using the web maps and Living Atlas content today, so you're using the existing stuff that you didn't know about before today, Dan, could you maybe speak to how they find if they're using the old version of the web services versus the new version of the feature services in their maps?
Right. So if you have, let's say, the old weather watches and warnings in your map, something, you built that map up to a month ago, you're going to have the old version in your map. The new versions have automatically replaced the old versions in Living Atlas. So if you go in and you type in weather watches and warnings, you'll get the new version. But if you added it to your map, more than a month ago, you're going to have the old version. So basically, what you should do is just go into whether you're if you're in ArcGIS Online, go and add new layer from the Living Atlas, and type in the title that you want and add that to your map. You can delete the old map. If you've done some custom configurations, you might have to rebuild those things. And if you have any question, if you have done some customizations to your different web layers, I'll happy to assist in any questions you have about getting what was working in the map service over into the feature service, because these are two different technologies, and so some things you have to kind of start from scratch. Some things there's a shortcut in which you can get the hosted feature service to pick up on what you were doing with the map service.
Excellent, thanks, Dan. I thought that was a good question. So if you're new to it, you're in the right place. If you've got some older stuff, no, you need to migrate. Just start taking the time now to work your way through that. All right, so we've got about a minute or so left. I did want to give you guys just a sneak peek what's coming up, and just to focus you in if you're going to be with us this weekend for the National Security and Public Safety Summit or for the user conference starting on Monday. You'll see a couple of things here. The top one is we have an emergency management breakout session. The National Security Summit runs on Saturday and Sunday at the Hilton Bayfront next to the Convention Center. It does require registration for those that have UC passes. So if you have a comp pass to the user conference, you can do a swap and get into the National Security Summit for that as well. So if you have questions about that, certainly reach out. We'd love to see you this weekend if you're in town and want to attend. We have a special interest group. We're going to serve you some lunch, so spread the word, bring your friends. Come in to see us on Thursday at 11:30 a.m. We'll be talking about some real-time flood modeling. We're going to talk about our disaster response program. You'll hear from us as a team at Esri, but also the community just around those really interested in sharing and collaborating together around emergency management. And then there are a couple of demo theater sessions for the operations solution. So we've hinted at that a couple of times today. You'll have a chance on Tuesday, both at 12:15 and 4, to actually watch a technical demo theater. So that's a much more technical, hands-on type presentation about how to configure, how to use solution templates that we have available. And if you'd like an overview, so if you're new to this and you haven't been able to kind of get the background, you want to know where to start and get the bigger picture, just like we've alluded to as well, come join Jeff and I on Wednesday at 10 a.m. or 4 p.m. in the Convention Center inside of the public safety area. We'll be able to talk about that as well. You'll see that, I'm sorry, on those two areas there on the side. There we go. And then finally, I would say Dan will be there as part of the Data and Location Services Islands. If you have questions about live content and feeds of data, come visit Dan and the team. And just, there's a ton of information I realize on the slides. I would say take a screenshot really quick if you want to just screen capture your screen for a couple of key areas here. And then certainly then look at the public safety events and activities at the Esri UC. There's a link at the bottom there. Just make sure you follow that bit.ly link, and that will take you back out to a flyer that has all of this content listed by day and time based on what's technical, what's an event, and the like. So we look forward to seeing you there if you can join us this weekend or next. With that, I would just want to say a big thank you to Dan and to Jeff. Thanks for joining us here. I appreciate the time you guys have taken. If you have questions, you have suggestions, ideas, feel free to email me. My email address has popped up here, so rlandcloss@esri.com. We'll field it into the right team. And then for those that are following our webinar series, we'll see you back in October. We're going to continue the conversation, kind of deep diving into a mobile workflow around damage assessment. So we'll be talking about that as the next pattern that we want to just really hone in on for this year in 2019. And with that, thanks everybody for attending, and we'll see you on the next webinar. Appreciate the time. Have a good rest of the day.